Welcome, my friends, to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, and I'm thrilled you're joining me today for a fun conversation with a passionate author. We're kicking off the program, like it's our tradition, with a short reading from the feature book. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get started. I'm Angie Elita Newell, author of All I See is Violence, and we're going to read chapter 24. I reach across the fur, my fingers searching for a swift box. As a flash of light illuminates the darkness, I pause, holding my breath, and wait for it. It growls before the thunder rolls across me, causing my whole body to shudder. My fingers find Swift's box, clammy, bare back. We've been asleep for some time. He is already sitting up. Storm splitters, he says to me in the darkness. I don't know what that is, but the hair on my arms raises. Another strike of lightning lights up our tent, making the hide look like it's on fire. I feel Swift Fox shoot up into a perched position, ready to move fast. What did Sitting Bull say? I ask as the thunder rolls, drowning out my words. That they would fall from the sky, my husband answers, standing at the same time. He goes to our flap and opens it up, not bothering to put his leggings on. The chief said we're not to attack, a man screams through the storm, running past our tent. What was that? I asked my husband, pulling the fur we were sleeping under to cover my chest. An ayapaha. What's that? I ask in a quiet voice, barely above a whisper. I want to hide, even though I'm not too sure what from. A crier, my husband says, his voice far away and lost to me. I study his silhouette. His chin is tipped to the sky. The storm is sweeping over rapidly. It has an urgency that is making my heart beat fast. I think we need to dress, he says, closing the flap. He clacks flint onto our fire and it swooshes a light. I watch as he pulls on his leggings. He takes his rawhide medicine chest and pulls out a small bowl. He adds water to it and from his water hide and begins mixing it with his fingers. You need to dress, he says, looking at me quickly. I feel like a deer before it is struck. I want to move. I know I'm in danger, but I feel weighted to my spot. I watch Swift Fox as he pulls his hair back into a mohawk, tucking hawk feathers into it. He scoops up the white paste he made in the bowl, and I watch as he smears it onto his skin, covering his entire face quickly. He said we're not to attack, I say weakly as my husband pulls on his mucklucks and laces them around his calves over his leggings. I watch him open up his medicine chest again and pull out another sachet of powder, turning the white paste red. I know what he said, and we don't know if they are leaving or whether something is coming. I nod, my stomach sinking. I force myself to move, pulling on my vest and reach for my leggings. I slide into them. They've already become a part of me like the old one. My hair is still in a single braid Swift Fox wove it into the day before. I look at the flesh on his chest, which is crusted over in a dark red. He glances at me, covering half his face in red, and passes me the bowl. I lace up my own boots and pick up the bowl. Looking at the contents, it looks like blood. I know what I need to do. I push my hand into the red paste and press my palm firmly to my face. I look over at my husband. He is grinning at me as he fastens his silver breastplate to his chest. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Inside the Minds of Authors. We are so happy you guys are here with us today. If you're new to the show, go ahead and subscribe. You don't want to miss a single episode. We're here on Monday nights with new authors and fabulous books, so you don't want to miss out. And because you're here to talk to our author, let's welcome Miss Angie. Hello, madam. How are you?
Hello, I'm fantastic. Thank you.
I am so excited you are joining us, and I got questions about this book, so we're going to jump in. All I See is Violence. What is this book about, and where did it come from?
Well, that's a big question. So, this book is a deconstructed retelling of the Battle of Little Bighorn. So, I'm Indigenous. I belong to the Lidley Nation in the Northwest Territories. And so, we would be directly related to the Apache and the Navajo. And so, we're all from the Dene linguistic group. And I'm trained as a historian, so I have a pretty strong academic footing in Indigenous history. And then on the converse side of that, culturally, we come from oral storytelling. So being just like storytelling's always kind of been in my nature. Like I'm never too busy to hear a story from an elder or anyone really. Like it doesn't matter. I'm always willing to listen. I wove like my life experience against my historical knowledge, plus like the stories of my ancestors.
And so, like, I don't think there's too much of that perspective out there, and I felt pretty limited in nonfiction writing as a historian. So I felt like the fiction writing enabled me to incorporate the oral storytelling without having to be like, "Oh, here's the footnote," which is challenging to do. Like, it's like, "Well, the grandpa told me on May 6th."
It is such a fun way to storytell because there is that power that comes with oral storytelling. There's that power that comes with that knowledge is passed down through generations. And let's be honest, how many people you know in their free time are picking up a history book?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a mother as well, so I wanted to make something that my children would eventually engage in, because I don't wanna say they're not gonna become historians, but I don't really see that path. Which is
They're
fine. I
all
want them to be I'm happy for them. I want them to be their own little people, so
they're also your kids. There's something about children and parents that has a different dynamics. It's very different when you're like, "Hey, we're gonna go do this," and then when somebody goes, "Did you hear what your mom did?" They're like, "Ugh." So as a child with very active parents, I understand their perspective shifts because it's what you hear every day. It's from your parents. Why is this a big deal? When other people tell you about it, you're like, oh, it might be a big deal. So thank you.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
you brought a perspective that we normally don't see in literature. So
Yeah.
I'm a true believer that history is written from the sides of the winner. It doesn't always give you all the perspective. So when you tackle this project, how long did you work on it and how much research did you have to do to bring this piece into the light?
I researched it like I was doing like a PhD or a master's dissertation. So I took about 2 years of archival research where I went through whatever documentation I could find. And that's actually how I discovered. So it all started from one elder turned to me and said, "Did you know that there were female warriors?" And in my academic training, I had never heard that. You go through all these different army documents from the 19th century, and there was never really any mention of this. And so I was intrigued right there. I was like, yes, I'm interested, but I didn't have like any evidence. So as I got into the archival research about 6 months into that, there it was. And not only were there female warriors, but towards the end of the Indian Wars, the US Army was facing about half women to half men on the indigenous side. And they were winning battles. They were winning like decisive battles. And so so I started kind of delving into that, and that, like, really, really intrigued me because I saw with the women, to make up for the size and strength discrepancy, they fought totally differently. So that might have even been what turned the tide of those battles.
There's something about guerrilla warfare that comes into play when you're a woman. I'm prior military, so I understand. Like, I'm never gonna lift what a man lifts, nor do I want to. Let's just put it out there. But you have to become creative. So the moment you start talking about the women warrior, your face lit up. You got all smiling and cheering. You need to tell us about it. What did your research said? Because you're all excited. I'm like, oh, you're
It
continuing.
was
So we want to
yeah,
know.
it was just, like, really, really exciting for me because, like, here we kind of have, you know, we kind of have this Western idea of femininity. That's where, like, feminism comes out of, right? Is that pushback against that sort of, like, expression of, like, femininity, and here we had indigenous communities, like, it was celebrated, like, they weren't like, "Oh, you're a woman warrior, so now you're a man." It's like, no, like, these were still, like, divine feminine beings to these people, and they had their own protocol, like, their own code of conduct. And so my mother was an Air Force pilot. I come from a military family. So the same thing, like she was 5'1". She was like, we're pint sized. I ended up being quite good size. I'm close to 5'8", but she was just tiny. And so, here's this like micro-sized person, like, I'm gonna fly a jet. To me, it kind of shows like you can do anything, you can achieve anything. Like these limitations that we place on ourselves, we put them there. And then they're reiterated in cultures. Like history is told from the side of the victors. You don't want to say, like, oh shoot, like we lost this battle to a group of women if you're the American military. So just like kind of like sweep that under the rug, like that didn't happen.
Did you mention it? I don't think I have ever heard that on the other side you had females or that you had these women fighting. You don't hear it. You have this description of what the enemy looks like, and it doesn't look like that. It doesn't look like a bunch of 5'2" women tackling and down and taking you out. You're like, who is this army coming from?
I mean, yeah, like they were riding horses with like lances and gunstock clubs like in the 19th century. Like that's nuts. Could you imagine? Like,
No, no, I
okay,
can't.
I'm out of bullets. Let me use my club.
I'm with you. I was like, no, because I can't balance on a horse by myself, just holding on. You're gonna give me something else. Yeah, no, that's
Made
too much.
I started to start my day. Like, I'm not made of the same like material that they were.
I'm not strong enough. I totally with you. It's like I'm definitely a little softer. I would be okay with that.
And even like how they treated their horses, I found fascinating. So like we have the dichotomy of, we have this colonized Western environment where you have to stable the horses. They have to have harnesses and saddles and this whole protocol. You got to look after them. Whereas the indigenous horses, they were just like free. Like they just let them wander around and they would call them. Like they would have a special call or whistle, horse would come. And it was just this really strange sort of, I've ridden a horse before, like not my horse, just like on like you're like someplace random. Oh, trail riding. Of course. See
They
like
don't
maybe too
come.
down to like come to a whistle.
They don't come. I'm pretty sure I can be like, oh, I want to do. I haven't seen many of them do that. That's pretty impressive. Your main characters, you read us this passage. What can you tell us about them? What do they bring into this tale? Because the title alone makes you go, "Ooh, this is going to be intense." But the whole of them getting dressed and kind of that whole, we're not supposed to go to war, but we still need to get ready. What can you tell us about them?
So we don't really have like the indigenous side. We're kind of like made out to be like kind of degenerate, violent people when you start going through what was even in the media at that time. As an indigenous person, you're like, whoa. Like now we're stupid, savage, and violent. I wanted to humanize that because I'm like, no, I think these people are like essentially we're all one. That's what my ancestors taught. So if you weren't indigenous, like, yeah, you would have like this moral push and pull between, am I doing the right thing? Like, here we have these people who have come to our home and they're pushing us out of our home. So this is about the forcible relocation to reservations. So they're living free at this point in time. And the US government like bulks on the Fort Laramie Treaty and they're because they discovered gold in the Black Hills. And the Black Hills are sacred to the CU. And but they're like, well, there's gold there, so you gotta go. And they're like, well, no, like this is our home. And so they can see they're gonna lose anyways. And so there's this sort of ethical, moral, spiritual, like push and pull, like, is this the right thing? For me, like reading Ernest Hemingway really inspired me when you kind of read like his push and pull with like World War II, or you get into like Wilfred Owen, like World War One poetry. Like, yeah, it wasn't just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go like shoot these people. It's like, no, like that impacts your soul. And that leaves like multi-generational trauma, like not just with indigenous people, with all cultures.
It is a very much a huge point that we take for granted that in order to make these wars seem valid, you have to dehumanize the other side. Or else you're looking at it like we went into somebody's house, knocked the door out, took them out, and then we're expecting them to go quietly. So unless I'm sorry, somebody comes knocking on my house. I'm in Texas. I'm pretty sure we might have to pull some guns. There will be some conversations being said. And everybody's like, oh my God, did you say that? But how would you feel if somebody comes into your neighborhood? Nowadays, you probably come in with a tank and tries to take you out. But this is one part of our history that we just don't want to talk about. We don't want to acknowledge, and we don't want to take the action to say it happened and it was dirty and it was messy. But it's about time we kind of look at it and be like, how about we don't do that again?
Exactly. It's looking at it not from like a judgmental point of view, but just observing it. So you don't have to cast judgment like, oh, that person, because we get into some real gray areas, right? Even like the concept of race, like there's like heavy interracial marriages in the indigenous community between like not just white Americans, but Black Americans, Mexican people. Like it's heavily, heavily shook up by this point in time because it's been a couple hundred years of interaction. And so they didn't have concepts of, hierarchical sort of viewpoint. Like to them, if you were good at it, like, okay, we'll follow you. Like there wasn't, yeah, it was like, oh, they're cool. Like they looked past all of that because they looked at things from a spiritual standing point. So that's where we get like American Thanksgiving because it's like, oh, they're starving here, let's eat. Like, like that's just in our nature. So like for them to react in that sort of violent way kind of went against like what their spiritual teachings were. And yeah, that would cause a lot of friction. And to look at that and just like you said, like we need to look at it And we need to all like admit something happened there because reservations still exist and they're essentially like prison camps. So like you go there, you're like, why isn't there running water? Like,
We don't
what
want
is
to talk
going
about
on?
it.
Yeah,
It is that part of our
sure.
culture and our history that we have still going on, and it's like, what are we doing? Why is this still happening? Why are we not acknowledging, but we want to close our eyes and said, we did something bad, but here's how we fixed it. And we turn around and we forget that we're all citizens of this world, good, bad, and indifferent. Let's acknowledge that we're all citizens and we all should have the same rights.
For sure. Like we all deserve like an abundant life full of joy. Like every human being deserves that. It doesn't matter like where you're from or what you did. That's what the indigenous people in North America thought. That's why there was so much abundance. That's why there wasn't disease. Like this sort of like, us against them, like that doesn't show up until we get towards the 20th century. It's writing from that sort of viewpoint. And yeah, it was quite violent. And so that the trouble is like if you're indigenous, you have to live with that pain every day. Like we wake up, we brush our teeth to it, like you go to sleep to it. It causes a lot of reverberation and friction within our communities. It's kind of growing up in that. And as my worldviews expanded and I became a historian and I traveled the world, I'm like, whoa, these are patterns everywhere. Like this isn't limited just to us. Like,
As a human race, we don't tend to learn really well. We're very slow at the growing. Yeah, we might get taller, but sometimes our history, we don't tend to look at it from the perspectives like, how do we make a better human race without actually attacking each other?
For sure. I think like art provides like a really comfortable medium to explore like these topics. You can be uncomfortable in art in a different way than if you're in nonfiction reading or if you're in like a university course or you're like arguing a dissertation. Like there's a different level where you can kind of be like, especially with literature too, because you can control actually like what you're imagining. You're seeing the movie, you're kind of like trapped with the images. You're like, whoa.
Sometimes it's too much, too fast. I wasn't able to
You're like,
process.
I cannot unsee that.
Thank you. It's usually powerful.
Yeah, it's
I
super powerful.
I am so happy you brought this book to the world because you're able to open conversations, just like you said it, in the comfort of your home. You're able to question your own ideas and beliefs and then put yourself in the perspective of that character. My question will always be to people is like, what will you do if you were that person? How would you have handled that?
100%. Yeah. And like my greatest literary heroes came out of like England and the United States and were white. And that never like once like entered my periphery. I had a really traumatic childhood and I really identified with like Charles Dickens and Oliver Twist. Like I would read that book over and over again. Same with like The Secret Garden. Like it never like entered my mind like, okay, I'm not like a little like English like aristocrat. Like, never, like to me
Where
it was like connection on like a deeper level, like, oh, someone else has experienced this, like how amazing, like, and look, they persevered. Like,
the fact that you were connecting to these books that were definitely at a whole different place and time, but they still have suffering and they still have healing and they still have that power to persevere shows how much power literature has, regardless of the connotation. So I love the fact that you said it, you connected. And that's what we're trying to do with books.
oh, 100%, like books like kind of trump like all mediums in the same way in regards to like accessibility. Like you can be in the Northwest Territories and pick up the same book that someone, picks up in Guatemala. Like it doesn't matter. Maybe you don't have Wi-Fi, maybe you don't have electricity, like you can't access like that sort of media. Maybe your cloud storage goes down.
Mhm.
Like books like kind of have like this eternal quality to them where it's like, well, that story is gonna live on. And definitely seeing like the beauty in that too, in that sort of violence. Everybody has these traumatic experiences in life, but there's also love, there's also beauty. I perceive the world as like absolutely stunning. You see a sunrise and you're like, whoa, or in a different plane of consciousness. Those low points show us the true beauty of the high points.
It gives us the perspective that there's always goodness if we look for it. So it becomes a personal journey for us to find those balance. With your book, what message would you like people to get out of this story? Because it's powerful and it has all these things going together.
I think that like love and truth will persevere no matter what sort of circumstances thrown at you that way.
Very, very huge themes, let's be honest. Love it. So tell me, dear, where can our listeners find the book? When they can learn more about you, when they can learn more about this journey? Tell us.
You can find me. I have a website, angieelitanewell.com, and then you can find me on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. I
All
think
the
I
major
think
places?
online at Walmart.
Probably. That's a good place. Tell me, dear, what advice would you give an up and coming author? What would you tell them to motivate them to write a story that has not been written and be brave enough to push the buttons to actually do it?
Oh, that's what I was just gonna say. You gotta have like the courage and conviction to stay within your truth. And to have that truth, you have to be totally honest with yourself. Because if you're not honest with yourself, like, people can sense that.
That's a hard one to do, especially when we know we have this story we want to tell, and then we're afraid of people doing it. Like, what are people going to think? So I love it.
That's actually that comes into when you start going to query it, you're like, "Oh my gosh, like, did I write that? Is someone gonna read that?" And then you kinda, like, just get over it and, like, you realize as an artist, like, that's an expression of yourself, but now it's sort of like it belongs it doesn't really belong to me anymore. It belongs to whoever reads it, like, that's now their, like, art that they can interpret however they like, and being okay with that, right? That's part of, like, the courage as an artist and a writer.
I remind a lot of writers that once you create the book, now you're just the caregiver of those characters. It belongs to somebody else. So you said it very well. This is their piece. You just entrusted to not, destroy them in the journey that you created for them. So,
Exactly.
dear, before you leave us, are you ready for the lightning round?
Oh, I think so.
Good.
I didn't know there
Easy.
was gonna be one. It's like quiz time at school. It's like, "Oh, shoot."
So much better. So much better when people don't know. The answers are perfect. Easy peasy. Don't think too hard about this. Let's see how you do. Pepsi or Coke?
Coke.
See, fast. You got this. Wizard or pirate?
Wizard.
You sound so timid. You're like, oh.
Oh, that was a tough one because I like both. I was like, "Merlin or Jack Sparrow, quick."
When you put it that way, that's a tough one. Yes. Hotel or camping?
Oh, see, that's a tough one too. Like, I kind of like the middle ground. I like glamping to be in like
I
an
need,
airstream.
I need to actually put that in there. That would be perfect. Mystery or fantasy?
Fantasy.
Nice. Here's a little different. If you can meet any famous person, dead or alive, who would you pick?
Anthony Bourdain.
And did not take any thought whatsoever. You had that.
That's always been like a
Why?
dream of mine. I was like, could you imagine having dinner with Anthony Bourdain?
I don't know if I could handle it. I'm like, ah, no. Dear, it is such a pleasure to have you. I am so excited you're here, that you brought the book. I need to know when more books are coming. Do you have any closing remarks for us?
I'm currently working on a story about Geronimo and the medicine woman he worked hand in hand with, like actually Lozen.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, we're going. And so they fought for 30 years against the US government. So that's a long time.
30 years is a long time for anything. Absolutely.
Right? And so you have like warriors like Chief Nana, who's in his 90s still fighting. So I mean, that's crazy if you think about it.
I'm complaining about being in my 40s. I don't know if I could be in my
I
90s fighting. I'm
know.
like, what?
He had a
Okay.
club foot by that point, and he couldn't like dismount to fight like hand to hand. And he was still getting on his horse.
What 90-year-old wants to fight hand to hand? Can we just talk about that?
Right.
Like, why are you doing that to begin with?
So I
We
mean,
need to,
that's a really, really fascinating like section of history that again that's sort of been like swept under the rug.
I am so excited you're tackling these topics that sometimes we don't want to face and we don't want to deal. And you do it in a way that people can see the humanity behind, and you bring in these characters to life that we need to talk about. So I love it.
Well, thank you. Thank you so
So,
much for having me too.
an absolute pleasure. We want you back. Keep us posted on the journey and have an amazing, amazing campaign with this book, because you need to put it out there to our listeners. Make sure to check out Miss Angie, check out the website. Make sure you pick up this book. You are going to love it. And we'll be back next week with another fabulous author. Bye.